great to have you here today. We have a really unique opportunity to meet with a local resident who I could honestly say, from my several meetings with Herb, would legitimately fall under what I believe is as an American hero. Herb served with the 101st Airborne, World War II, in the famed 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, Easy Company, of which you're holding the DVD documentary from HBO, Band of Brothers. This is one of the Band of Brothers. Herb served in 3rd Platoon, which apparently was not handsome enough to be captured by Hollywood on film, but I brought him to you directly. Very involved in the association of the men of Easy Company, and he's got his website up there for you so that you can track this further to learn more. Herb came home from World War II and went on to have a very successful career in industry as an engineer, but has been very involved in the 101st Association from its very first reunion post-World War II up till last year when I met him at the National Reunion here at Minneapolis with General Petraeus. He whispered into the General's ear some secret tactical information, and the General raised his hand and said, "I'll go back to Iraq and take that back, Herb, and we'll kick some Iraqi ass and we'll win this war." Way to go. So I've asked him to come today and share his experience in Bastogne, in that most famed operation that lost more Americans than any other battle in World War II, and then to open it up for questions that you may have. And we're going to look at some clips from Band of Brothers, and then Herb can give you some inside information on the guys in Easy Company that he knew, and which he still keeps track of today. So would you give a warm Red Bull welcome to Mr. Herb Suerth.
Thank you very much. It's always humbling to get together with people like you who are now serving. And everyone in E Company thanks each one of you for what you're doing today. Believe me, we do, and we believe in it. Vietnam was one of the worst times that E Company could ever experience. We couldn't understand what happened to the country. But anyhow, we're all for you. Just to mention a little bit, this website was introduced in August of this year. I have to tell you a little history of that. There are two Dutch folks that I happened to meet just absolutely out of the blue. A couple of our guys in E Company were looking for a place to stay in Bastogne 3 years ago at the 60th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge. They had gotten left behind by a group. They didn't have any place to stay, and this Dutch couple said, "Hey, we know a guy that owns a hotel," and they put them up. And that was the beginning of our relationship. These folks spend 10 to 15 hours a week on our website. I can't give them a cent of money. They won't take anything. I don't know if you have any idea what the Dutch people are with regard to their commitment to American GIs of World War II and those that are in the uniform today. They pay $5,000 to the Dutch government in order to take over an American grave and maintain it. There's a waiting list of something like 10 years to get on the list to be on. Fresh flowers are kept on the graves of anyone that died in that campaign, and in particularly the 101st. They have a very special, particularly those towns that were liberated. So anyhow, we've had 100,000 hits on this in the first less than 6 months. And I can't tell you how many wonderful, wonderful comments have come in. So, okay, that was not what I came today to talk to about. Many of you'd ask, is the movie fairly real? And I say yes. The shelling in Bastogne, if anything, was not portrayed as much as it really was. The weather was was just underplayed. Just imagine if you as a group today were to be, your platoon leader or sergeant came in and said, "Come on guys, we're going up." No further information, and 12 hours later you were on a truck riding for 18 hours, and as you went north and toward Luxembourg and upper part of France and Germany, it got colder and drizzled. Temperature was about 33 degrees. We rode in the trucks, open trucks. You know what a grain truck looks like. Didn't have a canvas on it. We rode. Each platoon had a grain truck, as far as I can recall. We might have had more than one platoon in a grain truck. There was no place to sit down. We stood with our full equipment. Of course, you could put the equipment down and that kind of thing. But it was drizzling, rain, and absolutely pitch black and fog. Oh, it was horrible weather. The temperature got down to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. At some nights. Now, it wasn't always that temperature. It was sometimes between 0 and 20 during the day. Some of us had some decent equipment. A lot of the guys didn't even have. They had their jump boots. And when it finally turned out to about 2.5 feet of snow. So trench foot, frostbite, and all that. Gloves were a problem because the gloves stuck to your rifles and your thing, and you'd tear open. If you had wool knit gloves, it was really bad. If you had a leather palm, it was a little bit better. But those are some of the things. There were nights when, and remember, the thing that I'm trying to dramatize, and you walk out that door with your platoon sergeant, that's the last time you see any kind of a building or shelter of any sort for the next 30 days. And you kiss warm food goodbye and everything else because you couldn't heat it. We used to, thank goodness they had the K-ration boxes with I don't know, I don't know, do they still have anything like a K-ration or they got the meals ready to eat? But our little boxes, they were encapsulated in a smokeless wax. And you could take a knife and cut them up in little pieces like that, and you'd put that down and then light one piece and then feed the pieces, and might get enough water to make a cup of coffee, because remember, once that temperature hit 32, your canteens weren't good anymore either. You couldn't keep canteens with water in them, other than if they were inside your jacket or something like that, but you didn't take those into your sleeping bag at night. Most of the guys only had sleeping bags that were good for about 35 degrees. I had been on maneuvers the year before and had known that the bags were no good for anything that was, we maneuvered in the Blue Ridges by that time, but that time I was not in the Airborne, by the way. And so when the order came to go up, I took a couple my woolen blankets and rolled them around my sleeping bag and took a needle and thread and stitched them to the base of the bag. A lot of the guys said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "These bags are no good for under 32 degrees." So some of the guys did something, others didn't, and they paid for that, because believe me, people said, "Well, you get down in the ground and you got the warm," well, the ground temperature, well, that was good right after you dug the hole. But it sort of froze very shortly after that. And the holes, if it started to dig a hole.
How about if we take a look at a scene so you can set the picture? Do you have the ability to do that, Kent? Just to set that.
Yeah, fine.
Here. Can you pull up a basket?
Probably have the ability, whether we can execute.
Yeah.
That's all right. Yeah.
What I need is one of my kids here.
Well, oh yeah. Yeah, how true that is.
Can everybody hear back there okay?
Yes. So the gear wasn't necessarily standard for everybody.
Well, it was by that time, see, I'd just come off the line in Holland for 70 days. And they'd only been back in Marmelon-le-Grand for about 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. Yeah, about the 28th or so of November, and we went to the line on the 16th of December. 17th, I think it was, a Sunday night. This music is haunting. It gets to you, believe me. You watch this thing and I start to visualize scenes.
Do you have some of your fellow personnel that cannot walk it, 'cause my dad's a Vietnam vet, he can't watch anything remotely close to.
Well, no, I don't think we have anyone that can't watch it. We have people that watch it and get emotional about it. I'm talking about E-Company guys now. In fact, I was on the stage with a couple guys here back in Hollywood about 5 years ago, and he said they started playing it, and as we walked out on the stage, he says, "Oh God, I'm going to cry again."
In particular, you want to?
Well, I have to get up close. My eyesight is so poor.
Got holding the thin line, foraging for medical provisions, first aid attentions, healing hands. Looks like some frostbite maybe.
I don't know. Well, let's see. Holding the thin line. I'm not sure exactly. I don't. Why don't you try that and see what healing.
Okay.
My wife has this CD in her car and she plays it as background music. A year or so before this picture was made, they couldn't have done this because they didn't have the simulation ability to do it. All the technology came along, and that's how they were able to show those parachute scenes. This stand is still there, by the way, in the woods.
Have you been back there?
I've been back there, yeah, twice. Once in '79 and once in '01. They didn't portray the snow anywhere near as deep as it really was. And they didn't show the gunny sacks that the guys were wearing on their feet in order to keep them dry and warm. They had regular, you call it farm-type jute gunny sacks that were used for farm products. And they issued those to guys. I happened to have a small foot, an 8. I had galoshes, or what we called them galoshes in those days. And there's Compton, you know. He was one that was evacuated with combat fatigue.
Need me to pause just a minute.
Okay.
When we left
Carwood Lipton,
Gladstone,
my
we were short of
company
equipment.
first sergeant.
We didn't have enough ammunition. We didn't have enough warm clothes. But we had confidence that our higher military authorities would get to us whatever we needed.
And there was a ridge with a tree line. We were dug in on that ridge.
Lester Hashey, since passed away. Both Carwood and Lester are gone.
Well, like in Gladstone, we're down
There's
around,
McClung.
around per man there for a while.
One Lung McClung.
Because fog was in, they couldn't resupply us. Every time they tried to drop supplies into us, they missed us and dropped them to the Germans. When the guy got hit
Stop for a
in the arm
second.
with a piece
Tell
of
us,
scrap.
That's,
Herb,
huh?
Tell us about McClung, the guy that just showed up on the screen.
Okay. He was I don't know what the tribe of Indians are up there in Land's End in Washington, the state of Washington, but he came from that tribe. He'd lived in that's Hank Zimmerman, was in my squad, by the way, still alive. He came into the Army, they kidded, of course, as you guys, you're all in the military, you know how this jibing and this kidding between guys goes, particularly when you get into a close-knit group. And they used to say Mac never had shoes. He either had moccasins or walked in his bare feet until he came to the Army. and there was a lot of truth in it, I guess. But he was an incredible shot, incredible. I buried a young kraut on Christmas Day that had been taken down the day before. And Mac told me the story of him. I hadn't mentioned that to you, Chaplain, but I still don't know why I was sent out to bury him. I think it was because people were, someone in leadership was afraid that it would be a mound of snow out there that we wouldn't know whether it was a real guy or someone that was dead. And so that was why I was sent. But anyhow, and I'll never forget this, because the time I got to him, it was 24 hours later, he was frozen. And he had his hand up on his chest. And he had a hole in his hand, and he had 2 in his chest. Mac shot him running. I know, I saw this. I mean, I saw it with my own eyes. And this is, I told the chaplain, I said, Mac had the capability of smelling krauts. And I asked him this just a couple of years ago, because I had heard the story. I wasn't there when the incident occurred, because I had been wounded about 3 days earlier. And I said, well, Mac, how did you know, he said, because he had stopped a frontal assault. He was a scout out in the head of everybody. And he'd stopped everybody and then retraced his tracks back in the snow. And when he got back, someone said to him, Mac, how did you know they were out there? He said, why did you stop? And Mac said, I smell them. And someone said, well, how did you say that? He said, I smelled their wet leather. Okay? Because they had leather goods, we had web. We didn't have any of that fine horse leather and so forth. Ours was web stuff. So it's just that Mac was an incredible, he used to go out. I remember the first night we were in Bastogne, I saw him heading out across a field, and he was our platoon scout. And I said to Shifty, who was my squad leader, Shifty Powers, I said, Shifty, where's that guy going? He says, oh, it's getting close to dark. He said, he's looking for snipers. And and believe me, he stalked those guys like he would a bear or something else in the woods. And they were usually dead if they were foolish enough to move when he had a chance to shoot them. So, but he did that. It was consistent, all the time kind of stuff. I don't know how he came through. He was one of the few guys that came through. He had about 3 Purple Hearts, but of course that was average in the company. So anyhow, this is Hank Zimmerman. Okay, you want to go to that?
Yeah, well, taking him out, he said, get my wristwatch off my arm. And then a medic came along.
Oh, that's
I think
me.
He really saved my life, because he stuck a Suerth in the key position, morphine.
Even today, a real cold night, we go to bed and my wife will tell you that first thing I'll say is, I'm glad I'm not in Bastogne.
They always say, they kid about that. The guys say, someone says Bastogne if we were in a crowd of E Company guys, and I think half of them would shiver. Just talk about post-traumatic. There's you remember.
So the snow is much deeper.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't remember that scene. I don't remember that scene. That was the other thing, too. If you were wounded seriously and you didn't get medical attention pretty quickly, you were dead. You froze to death. We found a lot of krauts that were frozen right to their guns, right to the machine gun or wherever they'd been hit. They were laying there. And that Christmas Eve thing attack, the guys say, well, they came to eat our lunch on Christmas Eve and we ate theirs. And we did. They had 42, they left 25 in the woods dead.
Is this forest scene realistic?
Yeah, it's It's not quite as good as what it should be because it's pine plantations, tree plantations, absolute orderly rows of trees. You know, you could see down a row as far as the convergent would take place on the trees. I don't know which medic they're portraying here, but I remember a medic and one other guy out in the, yep. Oh, that's a real scene. You had to melt snow. That was the only way you could do it, you know.
So Herb, how about if we pause here and you take us to the map and
Sure.
orient us to the battlefield?
Sure,
How's that?
sure, good enough. Yeah, and be sure, don't hesitate to interrupt me on that, because I talk too much.
That's okay. We're gonna get our money's worth here today.
Okay. Okay, here's,
Bottom one.
oh yeah. Here is Bastogne. This is the highway that I believe that Patton came up with most of his armored, and they fought through most of that. And this is the Bastogne-Houfflet Highway. Now, if you remember some of your history, that was where they massacred a whole bunch of GIs in the early part of the breakthrough. And we knew that. So what do you think our attitude was about surrendering? It was, hell no, Joe. We're staying. And in fact, we'd already talked about that round, and we'd get together at just before dark every night, and you know, the outposts and all that were manned and that kind of thing. And I was wounded outside of a little town. Now there's Noville, and down here, right in this area, just outside of our perimeter, is a town called Foy. And my holes were, holes of E Company were right along in this corner of the, in fact, at 3 holes away from my foxhole, the wood squared off, and that was naturally the line. And there was an elevated road that came through from Foy over here to, see, it's not showing on this, out this way. In fact, there's a monument, if any of you get there, there's a monument just outside of Bastogne on a little road that comes from Foy to the east toward Germany. And that's a monument to the guys in E Company that were killed there in that woods. It was something we built about 2.5 years ago. All right, so, and then I got hit here in a town called, just outside of a town called Recone, R-E-C-O-G-N-E. And that was when there was that interview that we had there. Okay, does that, any questions?
Show us the route you trucked up.
You know, we had to have come up, because we came up on some pretty good roads, because we moved at, I would say, 40 miles an hour average, which was pretty good with blackout, although sometimes they didn't black out. But remember, at that particular instance in the whole thing, the Krauts had air superiority. No American units were flying because the weather was so horrible in France that they couldn't get off the ground. And you remember, those are the days before radar or GPS or anything like that. So
Herb, the movie portrays that when you get out of the trucks, you're starting to encounter the rear guard.
Oh yeah, when we got out of the trucks, almost immediately, as that movie portrays, we saw this influx of GIs coming at us. They were walking down the road. They were bedraggled. They were, you know, on the fringes of combat fatigue. It was really a very, for an airborne unit, we couldn't understand what was going on. I mean, to me, it was my first time I'd seen combat, and I couldn't imagine that they were coming the wrong way. We were going up there, and they were coming back and saying, they're right behind us, and they were maybe 10, 15 minutes, and as I told the chaplain this morning in the car. It was only minutes after that that I heard my first burp gun. And then a couple minutes after that, I'm walking behind a guy that got killed when he in the attack on Foy on the 13th of January, Frankie Mellett. And I said, all of a sudden, it was right now. Nothing has frozen yet, but it's horrible mud, just horrible red clay mud. And we were naturally on the fringes of the road, but we were in combat interval, and our scouts were out. So we knew that, you know, we were about to make contact. We didn't really make a lot of contact that day at all. They sort of faded into the woods. But all of a sudden, you know, it was sort of quiet, and it went, and I look off, and maybe about the middle of the table there's something sticking out of the mud with fins on it. It was a mortar shell. And I said, geez, Frankie, what's that? You know, I'm learning, trying to stay alive at the same time. I guess you'd call it on-the-job training. But anyhow, he said, that was a mortar. I said, well, yeah, they fire a lot of duds. So Frankie had been a Toccoa guy, and he had been through the Normandy and Holland, and this kind of thing was just, that happened, and that's the way it was, you know, that's the way they, but anyhow, all these guys are coming at us. And the people are saying, what's going on? They said, they're right up the road, you know, you're going to get overrun. And the guys are taking off their getting grenades from them and ammunition. I don't know how I ended up with 2 bandoliers and a full cartridge belt, and my rifle was in good shape. It was one little detail. I had never zeroed it.
That's a big detail.
And I zeroed it about a day and a half later. I went up to Lieutenant James, who was my platoon leader. I said, Lieutenant, I got a rifle. I've never zeroed the damn thing. And he rolled out you know what the signal corps wire rolls look like. There wasn't much snow on the ground yet. And he rolled that out. He said, well, that looks like it's about 100 yards. See if you can hit it. So I hit it, and, you know, we adjusted the sights and so forth. But that was my introduction to combat that first day. Those guys were gone shortly. And as I said, our scouts were out. We were looking for contact. They made contact. We pulled back a little bit. They pulled back a little bit. And then we moved up that road on that Bastogne-Houffley highway and went off to the right into the woods, not very far off the highway. I could see the highway from my foxhole. And very interesting, because there's a barn on the other side of that road. And, you know, it had the haymow, and the haymow was open, and you could see it from where I was. And in 201, right after the premiere of the movie, my daughter was walking ahead of me in the woods, because I wasn't getting around. I was moving over fallen limbs and all that. And I had described where my foxhole was. And she was up, maybe 100 feet ahead of me. And she said, Dad, I think I'm in your foxhole. I see the barn with the hole in it. And there it was. 40 years, 45 years. No, that was, what, 55, 60 years, 55 years or before, afterward. So, and that road, on the side of that road was a spring. So we could get, and boy, when I think back of that, I would no more drink that water today coming out of a field on the side of a road than the man in the moon, but that was all we had. And I don't remember dropping any pellets or anything else in it. And we used to go over there every day. Well, one day, you know, friendly fire didn't get started in Vietnam. Friendly fire started, you know, long before World War II, but in World War II there was a lot of it, and it was not really made a lot of. 3 P-47s came over and strafed us. And they dropped a 500-pound bomb. I think that's in the book, I believe. And just narrowly missed our battalion battalion CP with all the officers in it. They were having a meeting. Every one of them would have been killed if they'd have hit that. We had an orange recognition panel out, all the necessary stuff. Boy, they fired their 50 calibers and dropped those bombs, took off. The next day they came back and did the same damn thing, and we shot at them. Well, what are you going to do? You got to. They don't recognize the orange panel. They think we got green uniforms on or something. You know? So that happened. But the unfortunate part about that was that I was sent out to get water that day. You know, I was somewhat low man on the totem pole. I was a replacement. Although we had probably 15 guys in the company from replacements from. And if you remember, if you know, an airborne unit never replaces on the line. They always replace when you're in. So that was, thank God, I knew a lot of those guys. I didn't go in there one night and be in combat the next. I had about 2 weeks to get acquainted. But anyhow, one of the P-47s caught one of our guys, not an E Company guy, but someone else getting water. Not very pleasant. I had to clean his brains out of the spring in order to get water for the day. Because they hit him right in the head. There was a big hole in his helmet and so forth. And I never told anybody about that. Never mentioned it to Sol, because I figured, oh my, you know, I think I drank the water that day, but I'm not sure. 20 years later, I was sitting in a reunion, and this is a point that I have made with Chaplain. I think it's a very important part, is the reunions that we've had, because we've never missed a reunion in 62 years. Now, guys come and go and all that, but we have guys come in wheelchairs and their parents or their relatives are saying you can't go, and you said, I'm going, and they go home and die, you know, because that's the kind of dedication. But I really believe that that's one of the big things, and I can't stress it enough, is to, when you come home for wherever you've been, to maintain that camaraderie, to maintain that contact, to talk with guys, get committed, but I'm very active. Well, I'm president of the Men of Easy Company Association, which has a lot more work than it has valor. Believe me, not valor, but fringe benefits. But I think that's really important. Anyhow, back to the 20 years later, I was talking to Pappy King. By the way, Pappy was the only guy in our company who had a kid that was home. And so that's where the nickname came from, Pappy. I was Junior because my dog tag said Junior. Anyhow, Pappy and I were sitting there, and I don't know, we got talking about that particular day or something. And I said to him, I said, you know, Pappy, I said, there's something I never talked to anybody about. I said, I had to clean that guy's brains out of the spring that day. And he looked at me with this funny look, and he said, I had to go back there that day. You didn't do a very good job. So, anyhow, those are some of the things that you remember. Yeah, I remember it. It isn't a scar. I don't wake up at night. I think one of the reasons that I don't have any of that kind of thing happen is my time in combat was relatively short. And I was so severely wounded that I concentrated so much on rehab and that part of it that I just never, the other part of it sort of fell by the wayside. So going up that road that day, we stopped, and we were just on the side of the road. There was a haystack out there. Went out to the haystack, and everyone threw their, we didn't have any sleeping bags that night. I know that because that equipment was behind us. We just had our combat gear. So guys dug holes in the haystack and crawled in. And some of the guys who were a little bit more combat wise just took straw and threw it on the ground and laid there and tried to sleep up against the road. About the middle of the night, a shell came over and took the top of the haystack off. They probably had known where we were dug in because they had good observation all over. And it landed out, you know, maybe 50 yards away and went off. And I'll never forget this. A guy by the name of Popeye Wynn came, and we were heads out of the, naturally you kept your head out of the stack or, you know, haystack. You weren't head first into the haystack. And he came running by. And I'm looking at him, and all of a sudden he comes running by the second time. And I said, Popeye, where are you going? He said, the other side of the haystack. And he's going like mad. But you remember now, they had just come off the line in Holland. They hadn't really rehabbed a lot, hadn't had a lot of sleep. And they were actually, well, we hadn't had any sleep from Sunday, since Sunday night until that was then sometime Tuesday morning that we were in that, or the wee hours. So everyone was pretty tired, and he was running in his sleep. Dug in the holes up there, and we stayed in those holes almost the entire time we were there. We moved out of them once and moved back, a couple of Danette's portrayed in the movie. And then we got the assignment to go up to Racon, and there were a lot of, that was on the night of the 10th of January that we went to Racon. And there was trouble with prisoners getting back to be interrogated. No question about it, no question. Depending on where they were captured and how the circumstances they were captured, they might live through the capture and they might not. Glad that I was never involved in that kind of thing. But guys were. Bill Garnier, who is one of the very well storied guys on HBO, I was sitting next to his wife at a reunion, and the introduction of the book Band of Brothers, not the movie, but way back when Stephen Ambrose had finished the book. And he put on a seminar for 700 World War II historians down in New Orleans. And as he was the curator of the Eisenhower Library, he had contact with all these people. And they got all the D-Day vets up there. There were, not all of them, but like 10 of them from our company. And they were all talking about their D-Day. Bill got up there about halfway down the group, and he was very quiet, and he stood at the mic for a couple seconds, and he said, well, and I'm trying to quote him as well as best I can. I have it on tape. I'm not proud of what I did on D-Day. And he says, I killed 17 of them. He murdered them. He shot them down. They didn't have weapons. They didn't have anything. But his brother, if you know the story, had been killed at Anzio just weeks before that. And Bill was a tough guy from South Philly. And, to him, retribution was the only way he could deal with that anguish. Well, let me tell you, that audience was about as quiet as anything could ever be. I was sitting next to his wife, and she's sitting there with her mouth open. She couldn't believe he was talking about that. Whether he ever talked to her about it, I don't know. But most of the guys, there were a couple guys that knew it, but most of the guys in the company had never heard of it before. There was another storied thing that comes up that happened again on D-Day, and this is where Spears was accused of killing one of his own men. And it's a true story. It did happen. But the circumstances were such that sometime during that first day of combat, they had broken in, the guy had broken into something, and he got into a wine cellar and found some Calvados and drank it and got absolutely roaring drunk. They couldn't shut him up. They tried to haul him down. They tried all kinds of things. And Spears gave him the command to shut up. And he did, and he pulled out his .45 and killed him. Now, I have a written account of that story because it was written by the company clerk who was standing right next to Spears when he reported to his company commander in D Company. Spears was then in D Company. He was not part of E Company. And he went up to his company commander and he said, "Sir, I shot a man last night. One of my men, I think he said." And the company commander turned to him and said, "Was it on accident? Was it an accident, or was it on purpose?" And Spears said it was on purpose. The company commander said, "We'll talk about it tomorrow." Now this is, I've gotten written not testimony, but eyewitness account of it. And the company commander was killed that next day, and that thing that never really was addressed one way or the other. Some guys say, well, couldn't he have hit him on the head or something? Well, maybe he could have, but you don't know. They were in the hedgerows, he was yelling. The Krauts were good at sound shots, believe me, because that's how I got hit, was a sound shot. The guy on it sitting up on a tank lit a cigarette, and wham, 188 right down there, and you never heard it coming, because as you all know, 88s have the trajectory, the muzzle velocity of in excess of what a deer rifle has, so you don't hear the shot before it hits. So, okay, that's some of my recollections of Bastogne. The temperatures, one night I remember when we were without bags, we had our bags, our bags had been blown up in a truck that was coming up to support us. We had moved out of our holes in that first position and were making a sweep. And a truck was going to come up this road and, you know, bring the stuff behind us, and it blew up. It ran over a couple of teller mines, and I remember a helmet of one of the guys hanging up in a tree. And so we were in a foxhole that was dug by the Krauts. I had enlarged it because some of the guys were out sweeping the woods to make sure we were somewhat secure for the night. And they took some prisoners, and I was down, you know, about this deep in the hole and digging a little further. So the ground is about here, and I look out, and here's a couple German boots standing there right in front of me. Well, they'd been captured, but it came up in the snow, and it was real quiet, and there was a couple of them standing there. But I thought I'd been captured at that point, but luckily he was the one that was, the Kraut was the one that was tapped. But we slept 2 on the bottom and 2 on top in the hole in order to stay warm. And then every couple hours, the 2 on the bottom would come up and stay on top. So at least every 2 hours you had some semblance of warmth. But the thing that was the bad part then, when you'd been in that, was you could get your feet wet. And even if with rubber boots on and jump boots, your feet sweat so much that with all the exertion going through the snow and all that, that your socks are soaking wet at night so if you didn't change your socks, you were in trouble. Usually in one night, you began to get things of frostbite. That's why in one of the scenes in going up to Bastogne when Garnier, which was not the way it happened, but you know, that's Hollywood, it's not all like that accurate. He said, "Hey kid," and I you know, that's why they named me Junior. Good God, I looked like I was about 16 years old or something. I was actually 19, going on almost 20. And he said, "Hey kid, what do you got?" And I said, "Well, you got any cigarettes?" He said, "Well, I got candy bars and socks." And when I got hit, I must have had about 10 pair of socks on me. So I had them all around. But it didn't save me. This was down in my legs because the shell fragment went through both femurs. And I told the chaplain I spent 18 months in the hospital, so 9 months in bed. Got my good conduct medal after 3 years in the Army, in bed, and as I always said, I was made a PFC at the same time, and I got that for never grabbing a nurse and kissing her or something after 9 months in bed. And I might say the Army Nurse Corps, oh my Lord, those women, they're incredible. They were incredible. What they put up with in evac hospitals, I don't know how they kept their sanity. Talk about people who should have post-traumatic stress syndrome. Whew. Wow, I remember waking up that morning when I was in the evac hospital in a cast. The temperature of the room was about 50, and I was in a all-wet plaster cast. Shivering like this. They'd keep blankets on me and all that. But I can remember guys dying all around me, all around. You know, head wounds and things they couldn't do anything about. They were just trying to keep them comfortable and running up and down. They didn't have enough nurses. And if you remember, our evac hospital was captured by the Krauts. So we had really no real medical support until after Patton broke through to us. Anything we had was what we came in with, which was nothing, because all the nurses and doctors were captured. They were forced to use to take care of crowd casualties and so forth. So you had they put up with so much, the nurses. You know, guys, the language that would come out of those guys when they were when they were dying, you know, terrible. And I remember that was when I woke up that morning, and when I had gone into anesthetic the night before, the day before, the first thing I heard as I went into was a room about half this size, had a couple flat farm-type tables underneath on it, and was a log house up in the Ardennes forest. And just well, no, that was when they first treated me. That was another one. I won't go into that. But anyhow, they were doing the surgery and there were 2 tables they were operating on. And the thing was, I never, ever, to my knowledge, ever lost consciousness that whole time from the time I got hit, which was probably about 2 in the morning, until maybe noontime the next day when they took me into surgery. And I didn't know this, but they kept amputees till last because they weren't dying. And when we came in, when they hauled me into the room, I heard a saw go. I don't know how, it must have been a little generator or some dog, because I remember hearing it go zzz, like, and it sunk in. They're cutting a bone. They're doing something. So when I got on the table, they looked at me, and they were all ready. The guys are, you know, got their hands up in the air, and they got the surgical masks on. The anesthesiologist is standing right at my shoulder, about ready to put the mask over me, and they said, I looked at that surgeon and I said, are you going to take my legs off? Because I thought that's what was going to happen, because they were really shattered. I mean, my legs were like this, you know. And he said, no, trooper, I don't think so. And he excused the expression, but I said, you aren't shitting me, are you? And he says, no, I'm leveling with you. I said, okay, give me the mask. So I put the mask over. 24 hours later, I woke up. I didn't know if I had my legs. I had no idea. My blankets were all over these casts. So the nurses are running up and down, and I said to one of the nurses as she went by, I said, will you take that blanket off of my cast there? It's bothering my toes. Didn't know if I had any. When she took that leg and I saw those 10 toes, I think I went to sleep for another 24 hours. So anyhow, want to open it up to any questions? Or one thing that I'd like to say is, I'm standing here today because of a gentleman who wrote a book about us, and the rest is later on history, the HBO series and all that. But the guys in E Company are humbled. It's hard for us to really comprehend the notoriety that we have had that comes to us because of that. And we like to rationalize it to say, okay, we represent everyone and anyone that served in World War II in a combat position. And we are, you know, we're overwhelmed with it. My wife and I were riding the bus to go to Utah Beach to see the premiere of this movie, which, by the way, it was the most incredible extravaganza that you'd ever see on a beach. 1,800-seat theater on Utah Beach. But one of the producers, we were about 10 minutes out of arriving into onto the beach in Utah, and one of the producers turned around and said to my wife and I, he said, you know, in about 10 minutes, your life is going to change forever. And both my wife and I said, well, what do you mean? He said, never mind, you'll see. Well, it has. It's just changed forever. I mean, people like, this morning I was waiting for a chaplain, and I walked out of the library. I happened to have my 101st cap on, and a guy came up to me and he said, were you in the 101st? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, what regiment? I said, well, I was in E Company 5. She said, you're one of the Band of Brothers. I said, yeah, I guess I am. He said, I'm Special Forces. You know, that happened just, and that's what we go. I go and get a prescription filled. The guy says, oh, I saw you on TV last night. Holy man alive. So, that's the way it is. So,
Questions?
please, ask anything. Ask anything.
I have a question. In the Band of Brothers production, would you say that like the sound effects were accurate in terms of the weapon sounds or the artillery?
Oh yeah, they were very good. In fact, Hanks told us that they used more ammunition every day of shooting the combat scenes than they used in all of Private Ryan. That gives you an idea. And the weapons effect sounds were good. They did, you know, unfortunately, they fired an awful lot of 88s at us, and you never heard those coming. You know, the other shells, you know, you could hear and you could take cover and you know, do something, but those you didn't hear. You know, they just came in. In fact, that night that I was wounded, a guy lit a cigarette up on a tank right behind us, and the tank engines were running, and that's all they needed. Wham! One shell came in, landed right in front of us. I think there were 5 of us, and I vividly remember that medic coming around and saying, well, he's dead, he's dead, he's dead. He got to me and he said, this one's alive, and he stuck the Suerth in me. And the only thing that saved my life was that 2.5 feet of snow, because I never had a tourniquet on my legs. Never. And it went right through, missed my femoral artery. Why, you know, I would have been dead in a minute, 2 minutes probably. So it was very good. Very good sound effects, very effective in that way. So, and you know, trees would be down around us, all around us in the morning when we woke up. You would have never heard them. That's the thing that bothered you. You know, you say, God, I didn't hear that shell come in. So, go ahead. Or, yes, sir.
Just a question as a replacement, when you first got to the unit, did you feel like the veterans who had been at this unit, especially those who had been all the way through the whole training?
You know, I never felt, you know, hazed or ignored or laughed at or anything. And to tell you, McClung, who was one of our real, let's say, strong man in the company. I mean, he was somebody that everyone sort of depended on for a lot of stuff. By the way, the world's worst combat soldier, garrison soldier. Absolutely, he admits to it. If you were in the room right now, I'd say, Mac, is that true? He'd say, yeah, it sure is. But, you know, I think, well, I don't know, I sort of lost my track now on your question there.
Were you accepted in?
Oh yeah, I wanted to go into that. Mac bunked right next to me. He had a single bunk, naturally. The rest of us had 3 high. But I think I had a low bunk too, and I didn't realize that the higher bunks were a little warmer than the lower bunks. But that's about, I never had any discrimination of any sort. Mac lent me, I was going to go to Reims on Christmas Eve and hopefully go to midnight mass. And I thought, boy, that'd be pretty neat to be able to go home and say that I'd been to midnight mass in Reims Cathedral, one of the more famous churches in Europe. And I said to Mac, God, I don't have any money to go to Reims. And he says, well, I'm going on pass. And he said, so he gave me 20 francs. I don't think I ever repaid him. But that's the way. And when I reported for duty with Ed Shames, who was my platoon leader, the only one I ever had, I said, Herbert J. Suerth reporting for duty, sir. And he said, oh, I said junior too, because that's on my dog tags. He said, you're junior. And I didn't know what he was saying, but he was saying, this is your name in the outfit. You're junior forevermore. And 1 lung and no shoulders, and the senator and Senator Claghorn and all the rest. I never took much offense at junior. Shifty. And the story with Shifty is his dad was a bootlegger, so the Shifty was they were moving the still all the time. So go ahead. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, Mr. Suerth, what was your attitude and maybe the general attitude of Easy Company towards the Germans? Was it a visceral that they were the enemy, or was it that
They were the enemy, and we'd kill every one of them we could. I guess you don't put it any blunter than that, and that's the way. You know, that was just an attitude. As I say, on Christmas Eve, they came to eat our lunch, and we ate 28 of theirs. And that's the truth. We got fresh pork, blackberry jelly, and black bread out of them, and we hadn't had anything like that, believe me.
and were there many prisoners that were taken?
There were a few. There were a few. I can remember. I remember an incident the night before I was wounded, and that's a sort of a funny story. We were coming along the back of the line behind another unit that was in front of us because we were going to sort of leapfrog them and go up to the Racon area. And it was a miserable black night, and we stopped. As you know, as those things always happen. No one knows what's going on, but we're stopped. And there was a great big outpost that we had captured from the Krauts. And I went down inside of it, and a couple guys were in there talking, and Chaplain, you get a kick out of this. He said, well, all I could see was cigarettes lit. And everybody's cold. You know, you were never warm. You were never comfortable at all. And he said, man, I wish I was back in Chicago tonight. And I said, oh, you're from Chicago? He said, yeah. I said, whereabouts are you? He says, well, around Austin and what's it, Montclair? I forget the exact, Austin and Addison. And I said, well, I used to play football in a sand lot there at the Ring of Funeral Home. There was a big funeral home next door to a big empty lot. He said, well, that's my dad. So I used to play sandlot football against these guys. We'd take our neighborhood group and go down there and play. This was in 7th grade, 6th, 7th day then. That was the day I was wounded, and how I got wounded, because I was looking for stretchers in a Jeep to haul some guys out that had been hit. Shames said, hey, we got these guys that we captured in this outpost. Take them back to some people that are coming up the path here. They want to take them back to headquarters. And then he said to me, make sure they get back. And I knew what he was saying. So with that, this lieutenant comes down and 2 sergeants behind him, and they're the guys I'm supposed to interface. And I look at this lieutenant, and my God, it's this guy I knew. I recognize him immediately in the light because I hadn't seen him in the light. It was dark. And he had a wild look in his face. I mean, just, it's hard to describe, but I think each one of you may know, you see movies that portrayed. And I thought, he's going to kill these prisoners. And I didn't know what to do. And with that, the 2 sergeants came around him in the snow and said, Lieutenant, we'll get him. And they took the guys, and I was saved of getting involved in anything like that. That, it appears to me, from what best I can, or I never have found out, that his name was Ringa, and he was lieutenant. He was not a casualty. He was not killed. I've never been able to establish that he came home. And I had a friend of mine who had gone to school with him at St. John's Military Academy. This is all stuff later in the war later in my life that I found out. Had graduated with him and said they were twins. And he was one of the twins. He said that one twin never came home. He was in a mental hospital that he knew of. And then, I don't know, I've lost track. He may have come home after that, but don't know. So, okay, that's a long story. As I say, I talk a lot. Go ahead, come on, any more questions? Yes?
I remember hearing stories about the Battle of Bulge that the Germans had, some of their units had dressed up in American uniforms, and
Yeah, you know, there could have been a couple of those road check spots, you know, at crossroads where they had MPs directing. There could have been some of those that we went through. Never had any direct contact or knowledge of that happening. But of course it did happen. And of course those guys were summary court-martial because they were all in American uniforms. They didn't waste any time on them. They were captured. So.
What kind of units did you encounter on the line there? German units? Did you come up?
Well, it was a mixture. It was a mixture. We had elements of a parachute regiment that they had fought in Normandy and in Holland. Same doggone, it was the 6th, I think, is the number, if I remember my numbers on that. But a lot of the people, well, like the group that, in fact, I bring this up at high school classes. I usually say to, you know, how many of you are 15 years old? You know, a lot of the kids will put it because I'm usually talking to juniors and seniors. And I say, you know, the kid that I buried on Christmas Day, I figure he's somewhere between 15 and 16. And at least half of the people they left behind in the woods that day were a Hitler Youth group. And it was slaughter. It was slaughter. They were in the woods. Can you imagine going into the woods, which is, no matter on the brightest sunlit day, those woods are dark because the trees are, you know, just about this far apart. And they had white snowsuits on. And the guy said, well, too bad we weren't a little more careful about how we shot because we couldn't use a lot of them. Different mentality, guys. Different mentality, you know. And that's what I think that, you know, when I look at the men and women that are serving in Iraq today, and I think the average guy in World War II saw, you know, maybe 100, 150 days in combat. I think the E Company saw almost 200 days in combat. And these guys are halfway, 2/3 of the way through their tour, and they got 200 days in combat. And some of them are on 3rd. I know a group that's going back, scheduled to go in May. I think they're on their, some of the guys in there are on their 4th tour. Served in Afghanistan, served in Iraq, you know, it's amazing. So, anyhow, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Going into the bulge, was there a sense in the company that you were going to get wounded at some point? I mean, you know the casualty figures from easy companies looking back now were, you know, phenomenal.
Yeah, they were. We went into Bastogne, I think, with 140 and came out with 62. I think well, I shouldn't say I think, I know our KIAs were 18 because that's the guys, the names on the monument in Bastogne in the Beaujacq woods there. Now, interesting, you know, one of the things that as president of E Company, nonprofit association, I've had a lot of opportunity, and I don't have a lot of hierarchy or anybody to tell me what to do. I run it past a couple of guys who are considered the board of directors. Anyone on E Company is a board of directors. So I call 3 or 4 guys and I say, this is what I'm going to do. Sounds good. That's it. We get it done. Chrysler gave us $150,000 to make a battlefield tour 2 years ago in '05. And I said to them when they were making this, I said, what are the strings? Well, we'd like to have you wear Jeep hats and a few things like that, which I don't really like, but you know, when they're handing up $150,000 without any real strings to it, I said, how can I spend it? And I said, what I'd like to do is one of the things I'd like to do is build a monument in the Beaujacq woods for the guys that were killed there. Because my feeling is that the Europeans should know who died in order for them to walk that damn path 50 years later. And it always bothered me that all these guys that got killed, we lost 52 from Normandy through to the last 2 in Alsace. All their names are recorded, you know, in the KIA lists and all that. but no one was really memorializing the individuals and what the fact that they were killed, and this is where they were killed and all that. So we put this monument up, very modest monument, and we built it from bricks from the combat debris of Bastogne during World War II that was laying over in brick piles and so forth. The first year that was there, we have a retired French paratrooper who lives just about 50 yards away from the monument, just outside the woods. 454 buses stopped at that monument. He counted them, and that was the first year. This year, he's telling us that an average of 5 a day buses go through and stop, and he says on weekends it's a steady stream of cars. So the monument has achieved itself. I apologize for the fact that we have nothing for the other, probably, I think about 2,000 guys in the 101st that were killed in the Battle of the Bulge. And that's a shame, but that's why I say we try to be representative and show, and if other people want to do that for their groups and they can raise the money and do it, they should do it. Because what gave me the idea was we lost, and this was well portrayed in the movie, we lost our first 17 men in Normandy before they ever hit the ground. That plane blew up. Nothing was ever found of most of them. And a Frenchman and a Belgian guy who have an association called a Forced Landing Association. They really were doing archaeology digs on plane crash sites, World War II plane crash sites. And this was one of the very evident ones and was, pretty well known, although there were a lot of other planes that went down with the whole group. They built this beautiful monument there, and each guy's name is on it. 17, our company commander, Lieutenant Meehan, and the others. That was before Winters took over. Well, that's why Winters took over. Meehan was killed on the drop. But they had beautiful bronze plaques, and they built the tail section of a C-47 or DC-3, whatever you want to call it. And it's got 2 flagpoles and all that, and it's right smack on where the monument, where the plane crashed. And it's a site that the people in the area know, and they see those guys. They see those names, they know those names of people. And when some of our people go over there and they say, I was Lieutenant Meehan's grandson, oh my gosh, they shut the town down. It's that kind of recognition. So that's what we've been trying to achieve. We have a site now picked out for another monument in Normandy that will take care of the other guys that were killed. And then we'll have a modest one in Alsace-Lorraine, which people are working on. And these sites are not easy to come by. They're hard. In Bastogne, they were wide open. They deeded the men of Easy Company the land that the monument stands on in the woods. So, yes, any more questions here? Yes?
Yes, sir. I've got one more question on expectations again. And it has to do with pretty much deployments and what you kind of expected. Currently, our doctrine is we deploy people for a year. They get to take their 2 weeks of leave. They can come back home to the state, see their families. What was it like for guys drafted or that volunteered for World War II as far as R&R or ever getting back to the States during the war?
There was a point system that if you'd been overseas for a certain amount of time, but all of our guys that made Normandy, Holland, and Bastogne, when they got to Berchtesgaden, a lot of them didn't have enough points to get rotated home. So it was, 36 points. It was sort of like Air Force missions kind of thing, 26, 28 missions or 31 or 32 missions, and then they rotated home. There were very few people that rotated home, that my way of thinking and what I knew. So, anyhow. No? Chaplain, you want? Oh,
Herb, it's almost 1300 and these folks have to go back to work. How about a final question? we see in that scene, you see Captain Winters about to shave. I'm having a hard time believing people shaved in Bastogne, but
That's
I'm gonna,
BS.
Yeah, I figured.
Believe me, that was Hollywood.
Yeah.
Holy man alive! What would you? The water would freeze on your face. You'd get frostbite.
Final summary.
And frankly, I don't want to belittle Dick Winters. I never saw him on the line.
Okay.
Okay.
And that was my question to you in summary. He stands out as the stellar example of the company. Now that you've gotten to know him over the years, what kind of man is he?
Oh, I think he's every bit as talented a man in leadership and respect. There's no one in the company that belittles him or faults him for anything, or that it's pretty well an accepted fact that he was a leader. He did a good job, and he didn't send people on any missions that he himself wouldn't do. You got to remember that Breakcore Manor when they silenced the guns up over Utah Beach. That was a company objective for D-Day. 17 guys took it. And he was one of them. He led the attack up the middle. So, and another little thing about that, Carwood Lipton was up in a tree firing down with, I think it was he was probably carrying a Tommy gun. And he was firing down in those positions that were, the crowd positions that were defending the guns. And I remember talking to him at a reunion, and he said, this was after the movie came out, and I said, geez, Carwood, you know, is that right about the leaves on the tree? He said, yeah. He said, I went up in that tree because it had a lot of coverage. He said, when I came down, every leaf was gone. And he said, they had to be bad shots. So, anyhow.
Would you be willing to stay if people can hang
Oh,
out?
sure, I'm happy. You know, yeah, whenever you tell me the taxi is leaving, I got to go.
Well, how about a show of appreciation for Mr. Suerth Jr.